Welcome to the Strong Enough podcast, where we talk about the challenges and celebrate the triumphs of people from all walks of life. I'm your host, Claudia. Today's guest is going to talk about her own experience with domestic violence and how she went from a victim to becoming a therapist herself to help others. She's also going to share about misinformation on the internet as it relates to mental health. And she's going to talk about sources you can go to for the right information. Please help me welcome Christene Smart. Christene, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I am well, and I am so excited to be here with you. You, in the few minutes that we have already been speaking, have just brought a smile to my face. We're going to have an amazing tattoo conversation later. I know this, and I know that you have a lot to share with the audience. So I'm very stoked to have you here today.
Well, thanks. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I would love it if you would start by telling the audience a little about yourself.
Okay. Well, I'm kind of all over the place. I think kind of what's interesting about my story is I had a planned pregnancy at 18, and decided that I wanted to be a young mom and I would go to school when, well, turned out to be my daughter went to school. And that's exactly what I did. And so I ended up studying psychology and neuropsychology. And I have a bachelor's in psych and a master's in rehabilitation counseling, which was at the time a versatile degree. And I combined my bachelor's and master's, which was fun for the whole family, literally the whole family, because my brain was turning into scrambled eggs, which was fun, but challenging, which I really enjoyed. And kind of, I raised my daughter as a single mom. She's incredible. She's going to be 30 in May, which I can't even believe. And I have a grandbaby now who's 2.5 and is me. You know how they say that like your child will be you and punish you for, and it skipped a generation. My daughter was an angel, and my granddaughter is going to give me a cadenza. Like she's going to kill me. Um, so then I get out of school and I actually started my career on a traumatic brain injury unit that was transitioning from like a regular nursing home to a TBI unit. And that was insanity. Insanity. And then I went right to work on a psychiatric unit inpatient, and I was there for 5 years. Um, for me, the more severe the psychopathology, the more that I love it. My dream is to interview a serial killer, because that's antisocial personality disorder, and that's like the pinnacle of psychopathology. And in my humble opinion, no interviewer yet has gotten it right. Like they haven't poked right, and I just want to poke right. And then I went from inpatient psych to outpatient, and that's kind of where I've been. I've done private practice. Now I kind of do a hybrid where I run my own practice, but I'm under a hub because the business part is and on any given day I run around 120 130 patients, which is about, it's at least double, possibly triple what most outpatient clinicians do. And I allow my clients 24/7 access to me because emergencies don't always happen during business hours. And like with my kids, it's like if you're going to cut, call me. I've got people with bipolar disorder, kids at college, they're like, I really need to sleep, but I really need to get this project done. And it's like, no, you have to go to sleep because you're never going to get the project done if you end up in the hospital. So sleep. So that's kind of me. I'm just kind of all over the place. I love working with law enforcement and first responders. That's something I enjoy. I did my internship at a VA here in New York. So that kind of got me started, and I am just a bitch of an advocate especially for my vets. I'm just like a bear. So that's kind of me.
We have so much to discuss, but there's a particular place that I have to start. People who know me know that I am a true crime aficionado. There is no true crime story that I don't love. So I have to ask, dead or alive, what or who is the serial killer that we know about right now, that you would most like to interview?
This is gonna sound so tacky, but probably Jack the Ripper.
Okay. Okay.
Because the way that he decimated the bodies, I already can see where that must have come from, and I would just love, 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 and because it's so long ago and it's so, like, shrouded, I would just love to be able to, but don't listen to me, bro, like, if you don't need to come back, I'm good. I'm good.
I was
But
gonna say, like, are we doing a seance? Like, what, are we gonna make this happen?
no, and my daughter's actually sensitive, and so I don't want anything sticking to my house, like, "Nope, we're good."
Okay, so Jack, not really.
Just stay indoors.
Um, you mentioned at the age of 18, that you had a planned pregnancy, and then, you mentioned that you were a single mom.
Yeah.
So, will you talk a little bit about, um, you know, was it a planned single mom pregnancy, or were you in a relationship and then something happened, down the line?
Yeah, I am sort of a all too frequent story of the girl that fell in love with the poly substance abusing boy who is narcissistic. And I thought that it was the love of my life. And had he been able to stay on a straight and narrow, you know, we all do it. I can love him enough to fix him. You know what I mean? No. And so I just that was the thing for me, and that's one of the things that's really really great. I mean, there's not many people who got pregnant at 18 that can tell their child that they are made from love, and my daughter was absolutely made from love, and he has very very clear reasons why he's broken, and I get that, but I ended up in a domestic violence shelter by the time I was 21 with my little girl. And you know, it was really wild. The experience in the domestic violence shelter was really significant for me because it's where I found a saying that I've kind of like based my life on. And the saying is, it was a quote hanging on a desk on the way out of the shelter that said, "Courage is the price that life expects for granting peace." And I was like, yeah, yeah, I get that. Because when I was in shelter, I remember sitting around in a group, and the woman that was in the running the shelter was leading it. And I mean, there's women with broken eye sockets, and they've multiple times. And I'm like, I don't know that I need to be here as much because he doesn't like beat me all that much. I mean, he had put his hands on me, but he was just so in my head. And the way that he really trapped me was convincing me that he would take my daughter away from me. And so it was like, I planned her. You can't fucking have her. She's mine. And so the woman said to me, she said, "Oh, honey," she said, "you need to be here more than anyone else because you're beat up on the inside. Nobody can see your bruises." And it was the first time that someone had like said, because I mean, by this time, I mean, we met when we were 14. I mean, by this time, the friends are starting to go away, and because everybody's like, "Oh, you're taking them back again." Oh, okay. And so people are like leaving, and I was just like, wow, it was just like so validating and has really helped me in my work as well. And so yeah, so he of course, like a lot of people do, I went back after 6 months when he said everything I ever needed to hear him say, and, but that was a time that I only stayed for 6 months, and then I left. I left. Like, there was no major thing, there was no, anything, and, you know, he just said, "I've finally fallen head over heels in love with you, and I have to be honest with you, and the truth is that I've slept with more women since we've been married than I have in my entire life." And I said, If I'm ever going to look at myself in the mirror again and have a shred of self-respect, I can't do this anymore. And I left and I never went back. And he now has, I think, 11 children. Yeah. When God
So,
said go forth and procreate, he took it personally.
I mean, he is the Nick Cannon replica, it sounds like. Do you
He's
know
just
if he's involved in the lives of any of these children?
no, no, no. He actually now he was such a beautiful boy. It's so, so, so sad. But he is like, do you remember that Ugly Kid Joe song, Neighbor?
Mhm.
Remember the video? Remember the guy in the stained wife beater? Gnarly. Yeah. I look at him now and I'm like, I can't even believe like he was so beautiful. And I'm just like, oh my God, I can't. And no, he doesn't. I mean, I was fortunate in that um my dad had connections, so I was able to get him out of my daughter's life when she was 7. And this is another piece I think that's kind of it's though it's personal, I think it's really, really something that people can benefit from hearing. And why I had him completely out of her life was he calls me. We haven't been together in 5 years, and this is how narcissists work because they never ever really let go. And they're so ego fragile that they can't stand to be rejected. So 5 years, and he calls me and he says, I just wanted to let you know that I won't be able to have the next visit. And I was like, he had supervised visits. And I was like, why, what's up? And he's like, I have AIDS. I said, I'm sorry? You mean you're like HIV positive? No, I'm full blown. And I was like, okay. And so I'm like, and he's like, I know that, my daughter's name is Allie. I know that she's going to be fine because out of all my kids' mothers, you're that, oh God. And so like, I'm freaking out, running out that night. And I mean, it's been 5 years, but still, I mean, this was a long time ago now. And I'm like getting tested, I'm freaking out. I get home the next day to a voicemail because we still had answer machines then. And he's like, alcohol and telephones don't mix, and I don't really have AIDS. I just was hoping that you would come down here and put your arms around me and make everything better. Bro, what part of divorce did you not get? Like, what part didn't you get? And so after that, I told him that I understood that he was ill, but the truth was that if he wasn't, he would not want a monster like him in his daughter's life. And that was it. And I said, when she's 18. So when she was 18, surprise, he was in a halfway house. And I took her to see him, and she said, you need to understand I'm not my mother. If I cut you, you're done. Like done. And that's exactly what happened. So now he just got out of prison actually for a domestic violence felony. So, you know, some things never change. Not to say that some people can't.
Mhm.
Personality disorders are extremely treatment resistant, but if you have the want and the support, and it can be treated. But unfortunately, it responds best to talk therapy. Meds really don't do very much for personality disorders, but yeah, no, he's still that guy.
What was rock bottom for you? What was the moment when you really decided that, you were done? And whether that was, the first time, because you said there were a couple times that you went back. So, what was it that got you to leave each of those times?
Um, One time that I left was because he had ripped off a. That's when I went to the shelter. Actually, he had ripped off a marijuana crop from a bunch of people. He's from down south of in New York, like Poughkeepsie area, and he had ripped off a marijuana crop and with my car and crashed it and all that. So my dad takes me with his 357 Magnum handgun to go down and get my car. I had already called the police and let them know that I was going to do it, and then I had to hide my car in a freaking barn. And I'm just like, the seats are all ripped out. Like he sold the radio for drugs. And I'm just like, for the love of God. So I went into the shelter because he had actually, my parents left their house, I left their house, and he actually snuck into their house and we had to have somebody get him out of there. So we just weren't safe. And so I went to shelter and then I take him back. Um and and then it was after that 6 months, I just was like, we got in that argument, like where he told me that, he finally fell in love with me. And then when I said no, he was like, then I'm gonna kill myself, and went and laid himself in on the railroad track. So I had to call and stop Amtrak. And I'm just like, and then he's like on a psych hold, and I'm walking out and he screams, she just said she's gonna hurt my daughter. And I turn around and I looked at him like, no, I'm about to hurt you, but I'm not gonna hurt. And fortunately there had been like nurses around and they were like, absolutely not. And then I was just like, no. And then that night that I left him, he knocked up the next girl. And so yeah, yeah.
Will you talk a little bit from a professional perspective about the manipulation that abusers do when it comes to threatening suicide? Because that is something that we hear about a ton, and it does make a lot of people stay or go back. And we all know, it's not going to happen, but it's a tool that is used greatly. So, will you talk a little bit about that? And if there are any signs that someone can look at and say, no, this is bullshit, or this may actually be a concern?
Yeah, sure. So one thing that I would say is that, unfortunately, again, people who are personality disorder, these are usually the people that we're talking about that are abusers, whether or not it's because they have, it's co-occurring with substance abuse of any kind, or it's just because of the way. So just a little pause. The thing about personality disorders is my field always asks the nature nurture question. Personality disorders are nurture. You're not born with a predisposition to have a personality disorder. It's something went really wrong. Either this is where Freud comes in and says that you were either really overindulged or you were neglected. Obviously, a lot of times there's actually physical abuse and sexual trauma and all of these things. But literally, a personality disorder can develop and manifest in the same exact way with the same exact symptomology from someone who it was like, mom and dad are really wealthy and they're really busy and they have to go off for their cocktail party. So nanny raised the kid and mom and dad are never really around. So then this is those in like true crime stories. These are those like spoiled little rich kids that are like the sports stars that like rape and kill girls behind dumpsters. That's because the rules don't apply. Like so the self becomes the center in this exaggerated way, whether you're overindulged or whether you're underindulged. And so to get back to your question, I think that signs really are number one, first and foremost, you can never know if someone is actually going to take their own life. One of the things that is risky with people who actually have personality disorders is that frequently they'll engage in what's called suicidal gestures. And they don't intend to die, but the gesture was just too far. And so they end up dead. And so there's always a concern about that. But one thing that you can always do is you can say, well, I'm calling for a wellness check right now. And that's usually a telltale right there. Well, they'll like back up like right away because they don't actually want any, because they're actually really not going to kill themselves. They probably have somebody else lined up to meet with as soon as they get off the phone with you. Sadly, because their egos need it. So I think too, if you've been in a relationship with someone long enough, you already know if they're serious or not. It's just going through your own work, engaging in reality testing, grounding yourself in the moment that you're in, and then just kind of going with your gut. And I mean, I mean, my ex called me and said he was on the Mid Hudson Bridge. And I want you to hear what it sounds like when my wrist opens up because I can't live without you anymore. And I was just like, I'm sorry, I can't help you anymore. I gotta go. And I hung up the phone and just kissed it up to God and was like, if he jumps, if he does, it's not on me. And that's the another huge piece around suicide is that it's not on the person that was around the person when they passed. And because ultimately you ultimately hold that. I mean, people choose to end their lives for all different kinds of reasons, and unfortunately, they take all of the answers with them. And so it's about getting yourself into therapy and treatment as soon as you possibly can and really, really getting into it. And part of what you get into is what it is that gives you the propensity to gravitate those toward those kinds of humans because us girls with the bad boy syndrome, and not to say, I mean, don't get me wrong, guys go through this too. I mean, one of my most frustrating things, so any males that are listening to this, one of my most frustrating experiences of ever was when I worked on psych unit and there was a guy who came in whose partner was beating the living shit out of him and he didn't believe in hitting women, so he wouldn't. And I worked my ass off. I called every single place I could possibly think of, and the best I could do for him was to put him up in a Salvation Army homeless shelter. There is no such thing, at least around New York, as a domestic violence shelter for a man. And that's bullshit. I mean, that's bullshit. I mean, men can be abused just as much as women. And it happens so much more frequently, and they don't report because they're men. And westernized culture says women can't hurt boys. And that's just bullshit. And so that's a thing that's super, super frustrating to me. Super frustrating to me.
Do you find that women who are abusers typically engage more so in physical or mental and emotional abuse, or is there a difference?
I think that there's not too much of a difference. It's just that women can get away with it more and they know that. So if you have this, propensity to be abusive as a woman, your guy walks, around with an eye jammy or a busted lip or something like that. And, number one, he's not likely to admit that you did it to him. And number two, nobody's going to believe him. I mean, I have literally watched a female punch herself in the face, call the cops, and say that the guy did it, and he's the one who gets arrested. Like, what? I mean, yeah, I mean, we don't really know how skewed the statistics are because of the underreporting. And it's one of those things, when I get guys in therapy, because I work with all ages. So when I get guys in therapy who have been abused, it's like the first thing you got to do is you got to kind of dig down in and get at that honest space. And one of the things that I always tell people is that when they come into therapy for the first time is that I'm just a tour guide. I don't have like a jing jing, or anything like that. I'm not superhuman. I'm just here to help you look around corners in your mind that you've not yet thought to look around, which is the coolest thing about what I do because everyone already has exactly what they need in their head to be fine. It's just that all the shit is in the way and they can't get at it. And so I kind of very visual in the way that I work. So I often give people like different kinds of analogies. And like for something like that, it's like an excavation project. We've got to like dig that shit out of the way so that we can find what's underneath of it. And ultimately, what's underneath of it is you. And a lot of people have no idea who I really am. And so that's where I've gotten really into the last couple years. This it's kind of a new approach, newer, called acceptance commitment therapy, and that's something that if people really have work to do. What I always tell people is that it's not really always necessary to go all like psychoanalytical and get all Freudian and like dig in. Like it's not, and that especially men, that freaks people out. Like, oh, I don't want to get into my no, don't take me to the feelings, don't do that. And so you can work around it and build coping strategies around it and not dig into it. But what I tell people all the time to be mindful of is that you can, like, especially if you're a stuffer, you can get over an experience, but that doesn't mean that you got over the energy that that experience left with you. And so what we do in therapy is we take power away from something that has power over us. And so that's what therapy is really all about. It doesn't have to be this mind fucky, voodoo kind of shit. It doesn't have to be like that. And I have a very casual style. And sometimes, I mean, I had this woman one time, we talked about makeup the whole time. She's like this woman, she's like in her late 50s, early 60s. She's biker chick. She's like done the things, and we talked about makeup. She's getting older. She still likes to be pretty. And so she's like, oh, my whole hour's gone. And we didn't talk about anything. I was like, well, how do you feel? She's like, well, I feel a lot better than I did when I got here. And I'm like, I call that therapy, because when we're really under the ick, one of the things that we forget is that there's still a life to be lived. People are so busy just existing that they're not actually living. And so even when I was on the psych unit, the like highest group there is psychotherapy group. You have to like level up, so to speak, to be able to get there. And sometimes I would just have like a casual, like, what's on your bucket list? First of all, if you were suicidal and you tell me you got a bucket list, gotcha, because you're not so suicidal. And point that out. It gives me something to work with. We would talk about tattoos. Because I have a eye. It's like it's on the top of my foot, and it's like my daughter drew it for me. She draws all of them. But it's like a celestial sun eye. And people are like, oh, so what do you do? Like look up like people's like skirts and like stuff like that. I'm like, this is so I can see my way to kicking people's ass. That's why I got an eye on my foot. And so like, it starts the conversation, and people would always say on the way out, thank you so much for this session, because it was just talking. And I'm like, it was reminding you how to live. You're still alive. You have things to say. So say them. If it's about music is the backdrop of my life. So that's another thing. Like you get me talking about music and whoop, I'm just off. Can take over a whole session. Like we'll just talk. And I often during the session, like if somebody says something that reminds me of a song lyric, I'll like say the song lyric and they're like, huh? And I'm like, oh, you'll get used to it. Like I'm back now. You know what I mean? But so there's all different kinds of things to get to by just taking a look at and everyone is worth looking at themselves. Everyone. Even people who have like psychotic illnesses and stuff like that. And that's where it kind of gets into the stigma around meds, which is another huge thing that I have that just kills me. Is like, there's this false, I think, kind of understanding dynamic dialogue about medication, that it's just like numbing you out and it's just this and it's just that. And what I tell people all the time is it's not. Like there are trillions of neurotransmitters in our brains, and we have these neurotransmitters that are chemicals that make it all happen. It's the most important organ in our bodies. We would never say to a type 1 diabetic, we would never say, don't take your insulin. Never. That's fucking disgusting, right? But if somebody needs to take an SSRI or an anti-anxiolytic or, God forbid, an antipsychotic, holy shit. Like, no, persona non grata, like weak, da 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 da. No. All we're doing is leveling out chemicals in a brain, just like insulin is making a hormone happen in your pancreas. Like, that's it. That's it. And it's always important to pair talk therapy with medication, because there's no skills in pills. That's another fallacy is, oh, I'm taking my meds, I should be fine. Have you done anything to get, it's part of the problem I have with like, hey, like If it means sobriety, great. Like Alcoholics Anonymous, NA, like that's great. Except for what happens in that a lot is codependency. You become codependent on the program because there's no therapist in the room. You're not actually digging in at anything. So you're sober, which is great. I'll take that over not. Don't get me wrong. But one of the things that drives me nuts around that is that people like AA is like, if you've been sober for 3 years and you fuck up for one night and then you're like, whoa, what the fuck did I just do? Like, and get right back on it. That's a setback. That's not a relapse.
Mm-hmm.
You should be proud of yourself. That's a huge accomplishment to be like, no, I don't want that for my life anymore. And to just get back on it. And so I think that you can empower people when something like that happens. And so, but so many people just miss that. And it's sad. It's really sad.
You said a lot of good stuff there. And I want to speak just very briefly to the medication aspect. I was one of those people a long time ago, that said, like, I'm never taking, medication for depression or anxiety. That's for weak people and that's just stupid. And then I took it and it was great. But I had that realization that, you know what, it's just regulating chemicals in my brain. And that's what's, often causing the issues that we see. And if there's medication to take for it, that doesn't make you weak. It doesn't make you, a shitty individual. It makes you smart for being willing to try to fix the problem, quickly and easily. So I do just want to say that.
Yeah.
You seem like a super cool therapist. So I mean, it feels like you'd be the fun guy to go to. A lot of our audience has therapist aversion. They're very anti therapy for whatever reason. Maybe it was a bad experience. Maybe it's just they don't know. You know what I mean? And they're just saying, oh, I don't want to do that. What are some things that you think people could look for in a good therapist or a therapist that works with them well? And then, what are some ways they could dip their toe to get into therapy if they need it?
First thing to do is to sit with yourself and ask yourself what kind of human you really need. What kind of human gets you to like be able to talk? So like every therapist has a therapist. I mean, it's like, you know how they say plumbers have leaky pipes? All therapists are fucked up. We're all fucked up. And that's why we're doing this, you know? And so I have to, and I say this with so much love. My therapist is like the hippie chick, like in the peasant skirt with her unshaven legs and the whole 9 yards. She gets me, I'm very cerebral. And so she gets me out of my head and into my body when like, and she's the only person who can do it too. So it's like, you know, I'm always like even hesitant when I have to go see her. I'm like, oh God, she's gonna get me in my body, and I just want to like psychoanalyze everything. And so that's the first thing. Ask yourself who's gonna work for you to talk. The other thing is always remember before you go to see a clinician of any kind, they work for you. So don't feel like just if somebody is not working for you, don't be like, well, this is what I have to accept. You can absolutely process with a therapist what's not working. And if the therapist is dynamic enough, they're going to be able to move and groove with you. If a therapist can't move and groove with you, be like, catch you on the flip. You know what I'm saying? I know one thing that's really, really super important is that, and what fucking sucks is that a lot of people can't afford. So if you go into the private sector, if you have people that don't accept your insurance, then you're kind of stuck going to like mental health clinics. And unfortunately, mental health clinics are stepping stones for a lot of clinicians. So what you get is you'll just start to establish with therapists and who told you they're not leaving, and then they get a better job offer and they're like, I'm out the door. And you're like, now I have to fucking tell my story again.
Right.
So that's a pet peeve. So always try to, And in different states and even different counties, mental health clinics can be different. So ask around, see what kinds of experiences people are having at mental health clinics. A benefit of a mental health clinic is that there's usually a clinician and a prescriber under the same roof, which is also something that is so hard to find. And for continuity of care, it's so important. But there are actually online, all of this telehealth stuff now. I know one of them is Apti Health, and not that I'm giving them a plug, but I just know that that's one of them that people around here use a lot. And they have prescribers as well as clinicians. So that's an important thing. Because, like, for example, the place that I'm under the hub of, they don't have prescribers. And I have a lot of knowledge about medications from having worked in the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times it's so irresponsible to say, oh, well, I'm going to prescribe you lithium because you have bipolar. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean? So people should be able to, understand what the medication is doing in their bodies. And they don't get that a lot. So ask around, do your research, start from that place that you're worth it. Even when you can't find it, it's in there. Even if you have to start from thinking about something like your favorite color. A color, I love sensory strategies, colors, textures, sounds, smells that either make you whoop or make you whoop. And so just start there. And I always say, because a famous cognitive behavioral technique is thought insertion. So if you have a faulty cognition, you insert a thought. And since our brains are neuroplastic, we can always rewire our circuitry. So it's like all you have to do is, I had a woman one time who was an attorney on the psych unit. What do you like about yourself? No. What's your favorite color? Blue. Okay. So get back to blue. Just blue. Where does blue take you? That's therapy. Where does blue take you? Dude, blue takes me, I'm either in the sky or I'm in the ocean. Like, that's where blue takes me all the time, every time. Just a color. So that's another thing to remember if you're kind of like phobic about therapy, is that, again, it does not have to be always in the major fields. As a matter of fact, a lot of times when I'm doing major processing with someone, I will be in it, and then another session we'll just talk about, like, everyday shit. Like, to remember, I don't want them to think every time they see my face that it's going to be like gloom and doom. Like, no, because that's not who I am. That's not what I represent. And so it's really important for a clinician to be checking in all the time. Like, where are you at? Where are you at? Another thing I think that's important that a lot of therapists don't get is, you will always tell me more by what you don't say to me than what you do. Your affect, your nonverbal communication. And so I freak my patients out, because if I'm doing a phone call with them and I'm like, you're doing that look down to the left thing, aren't you? Son of a bitch, how do you know that? And I'm like, I can hear it in your voice. And it's like that. I know that that's when somebody's feeling insecure, and so make sure that you feel like your clinician is in the room with you. Don't, and don't, unless you're not really ready to work, but you're going through the motions, don't go for it. And how do you feel about that kind of person? Because that's just fucking bullshit. That's somebody that doesn't know their job and is way too scared to get into your shit with you. Just be like, yeah, I think I hear my mom calling. I gotta go. Leave.
I feel like I should leave now.
Yeah. Download right now.
I love that, and I think those things are super helpful, and I love, how you said it doesn't always have to feel overwhelming. It doesn't always have to be, "Oh, we're gonna have this serious, conversation, or I'm gonna have to unload this serious shit again." So thank you for, letting us know that and making it clear that it can be light sometimes.
Yeah.
One of the things that you mentioned earlier, you talked about being an advocate, and you strongly advocate for vets and LEOs. Thank you for that. I know one of the other things, though, that you advocate for and feel very strongly about is misinformation. Um, particularly on social media, when it comes to different diagnoses or different mental health issues. So I would
Mhm.
love if you would talk a little bit about, what you're seeing that's out there that we need to be aware of and need to, think a little harder about before we just believe because we saw it on Instagram.
Yeah, and even more so right now is fucking TikTok. Oh my god, this TikTok shit is driving me nuts. Um, so one of what I'm really seeing right now, most of all, is horrible information around, ironically enough, personality disorders. Especially, not everybody who has a personality disorder is a fucking narcissist. No. So to not like to really give like a scope of how important this is. I have a client who is a physician, brilliant physician, and is getting out of a mentally abusive relationship. And the person she's getting out of a relationship with, just having heard about them, has obsessive compulsive personality disorder. I it's what it is. So I hadn't talked to her in a little while. She gets back, into the groove, and she's like, "Well, I realized, my friends were talking to me, and I've read online, and he's really a narcissist." Like, for fuck's sake. So I listen, I listen, and I'm like, you know what? Everything that you said is exactly right, except for he has these other little nuances that differentiate narcissistic personality disorder from obsessive compulsive personality disorder. And there are threads that run, like never being able to fill up an attention tank. Everything is everybody else's fault but theirs. People with personality disorders have what's called an external locus of control, which is exactly that. Everything that's wrong in my life is somebody else's or something else's fault, and they don't own it. And so that's one of the things that's really important to understand about, if you're like, does this person have like personality disorder? I encourage people to go on to a reputable site like, Mayo Clinic, go right into the DSM website. That's the Bible of psychology, and read what actual symptomology is. My concern is that a lot of this information that's being put out there, because it's social media, has the potential of being put out there by people who are predators, people who actually are narcissists or borderlines or what have you, not obsessive compulsive personality disorder, because they don't really like to associate with people very much. But it's and the thing is that, if it's one of those sites where you're paying money or something like that, like, they're just taking advantage of and right now, like, I cannot tell you, since this TikTok thing has blown up, and I don't do TikTok, I don't do a whole lot of social media. Um, but so many clients do, obviously. And I keep saying, if I have one more client say to me, "Do you think I have borderline personality disorder?" I'm gonna run my head straight through the fucking wall, because the best way that I can say it, and if anybody who's listening to this is wondering if they have a personality disorder, the first response is, if you did, it wouldn't occur to you to mind, because of that external locus of control. And it's kind of like in increments depending on the diagnoses. It's like, the way that it's described is like, if that third eye that's like conscience, that's like, yeah, you probably should do that. People with personality disorders, that's either really damaged, or in like antisocial, it's not there at all. It supposedly. That's why I wanted to read the serial killer, because I think it still is. Um, but it's just like a break from conscience, and that's why they're like, I can't believe that she that. You know what I mean? And it's like, well, she doesn't care. She doesn't know that what she's doing is wrong. He doesn't realize that, the fact that he slept with 16 different women but has a wife and kids at home, he doesn't get it, because he's just indulging the self. And I mean, we could have a whole other, conversation about like how that all works and all that, and anytime you want to, just hit me up. Because I love this stuff. I can talk about it forever. But it's just one of the best ways to know if you have someone who has a borderline personality disorder in your life is like, have you ever been like at a gathering and it's like, oh God, who the fuck invited her? Because now the whole party's going to shit. because she
Mm-hmm.
is probably borderline. Probably borderline. That's the thing, is that narcissists aren't really that loud. Borderlines tend to be female, and they tend to be very boisterous, and they're drawing attention to themselves. Whereas narcissists just, they just kind of have this like suave. Narcissistic comes up most time because they're the best manipulators. They're so good at what they do, and they love bomb. And then you're in, and then you're like, fuck, he's got me again, or she's got me again. And so that's that. The other most popular one that you see around is called histrionic personality disorder. Excuse me. This is also mostly women. But the little niche there, it looks just like borderline, except for they hypersexualize themselves. So they draw the attention to themselves by, these are the girls that are like cam girls and all this other stuff. And it can start very young in life. And then there's obsessive compulsive, which again, that's really rare. I had it when I worked in patient psych. We had a guy, was a doctor, had lost his license to practice, had become a pharmacist because it was so easy for him. And that's what he had wrong with him. And my guy, my psychiatrist that I'm working with, he's like, that's not what he's got. Okay. I had to take an entire fucking course on the DSM, bro. Like, I'm telling you. I'm telling you. And when I described it to his sister, who has known him, she's like, oh God. And that's the thing, is that people who have been around, it's like you're literally like unlocking something for them. And they're just like, oh my God, the tumblers, you can hear them. It's like clunk, 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 you know what I mean? Oh my God, this makes so much sense now. And so that happens a lot of time with spectrum issues as well, that have gone unnoticed, that people, when you talk to them about it, the tumblers start to click into place. Oh. Because a lot of times spectrum disorders that have gone undiagnosed get mistaken for personality disorders, because they've got that
Interesting.
the rigidity, like everything's on their terms, but it's not for the same reasons at all.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
So cool.
Well, you have gone through so much. We are gonna have another conversation very soon, so just put that on your calendar.
Okay.
Before I let you go, though, I mean, we got to talk some tattoos. And for those who are watching this versus listening, have seen you making some hand and arm movements, and so they have seen a lot of tattoos. Um, I'm in love already, and then you talked about your foot tattoo. So I'm gonna ask you, what is the tattoo that you have that is the most meaningful, and why?
Ooh. um well, they're all extremely, extremely meaningful. I think so. I have super meaningful ones for different reasons. They're all really meaningful because, again, my daughter draws them for me. So I'm super, super lucky to have that talent. How she came through me, I have no idea. But I have right here, I have one. You can kind of see it's a bouquet of flowers.
Mm-hmm.
So these are pussy willows, and they make the constellation of Capricorn because my mama was a Capricorn. And so this is for my mom, right by my heart. And then this one is a portrait of an eagle that my daughter painted for my dad when she was a teenager, and that hung in his bedroom until he passed away. So my dad was looking at my mom by my heart. And so these two are huge. And then the other one that's actually really, really meaningful to me is this small one here. I don't know how well you're going to be able to see it, but it's a crescendo. And inside of it, it says, I will. And it's from the song Atlas Falls by
Mm-hmm.
Shinedown. And why that's so meaningful to me is because I found Shinedown during the pandemic as a clinician who was like, I'm running out of gas. I'm running out of gas. And I found them and I listened to them incessantly. And then I heard Atlas Falls. And I'm one of those people, like, I live my life out loud. I live my life out loud. My goal in life is to never have to do this because I've got nothing back there. If you think you know something about me, you either know it or you're full of shit, because it's not the truth. And so this is right here. And it just reminds me that if life gets me down, just fucking keep getting louder. And so I right there, so I can see it. And what's really cool is I actually last September I actually got to meet I met Zach, Barry, and Brent. And so I got to show them this tattoo, and that meant a lot to me. That meant a lot to me to be like, while I'm over here and I'm trying to help people through something, and especially there was so much talk during the pandemic about people who worked in healthcare in the medical
Mm.
field, but nobody was thinking about the mental health providers that were doing telehealth that were
Mhm.
literally, I mean, I work with 4-year-olds to 70-year-olds, you know what I mean, and like how it was. And then you mush that all in with the people who hated Trump, and then there's the this and there's the that, and there was just like so much, and like, and they just kept coming and coming and coming. And so then finally I was just like, I'm getting tired. And but I couldn't say no
Mhm.
either. I was going to keep helping. And so yeah, so that's it's the smallest one, and it's also the first thing that I did when I went out of my house, because my 80-year-old dad lived with me during the pandemic. So for 2 years I gave my life to him so
Mhm.
that he wouldn't be at risk, because he had all of the things. And the first thing I did was I went to the tattoo shop and I got my Shinedown tattoo. And the only other lyrics that are tattooed on my body are by George Michael, Listen Without Prejudice. It's my favorite album, what I try to do every day. And then I have No Day But Today from Rent, because Rent, so good. So, so yeah, and
What
this is a leave-in process, so we can talk more about that as it keeps getting finished.
so that was gonna be my next question is what is next? So is continuing that next, or do you have something in between?
Yeah, no, actually, April 26th, I actually just got this done last Friday, and some planets. I decided my daughter has drawn me all these really wild animals, um, and so I decided I love the sky. I love the night sky, and
Mhm.
so I'm turning them into constellations, and so I'm putting in the night sky around it. And so gonna get fill on that, and I've got a whale to go on this arm, and then finish up fill, and I should be done with that. And then I've actually just got into these. Um, what's her name? Ryan Ashley from Ink
Mhm.
Master. She does
Mhm.
those intricate like beadwork kind of tattoos, and I threw that out there to my guy, and I was like, what you think about that? He was like, yeah, I can do that. So that'll be eventually, and then I have to get my wolves. I love wolves. So I got to get my wolves tattoo, and there's really cool clouds I'm gonna get behind the wolves, and yeah, and then wherever else I go, I don't know.
So we got a lot coming. We got a lot
Oh yeah.
coming.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's so wild because I got my first tattoo when my daughter was 4, and that is on my back, and it's like a celestial sun with the rays blowing in the wind. It has her name in the center of it.
Mhm.
And I'm really fortunate in that my tattoo people, if you're into tattoos, if you haven't yet, definitely look up Huck Spalding and Tom Spalding, like Spalding Tattoo Supplies.
Mhm.
They're well, not Huck, God rest, but Tom Spalding was my guy, and now his apprentice, Gino, Eugene Hernigel is his name. He's at Tom's studio now that Tom's kind of retiring, and so Huck Spalding invented like a tattoo needle that lays the ink under the skin differently. So
Mhm.
this tattoo was when my daughter was 4. It's never been retouched, and now so it's 26 years old. So I went
Wow.
from when she was 4 to when she was 16 without any tattoos, and the rest have happened since she was 16 because she drew that tattoo, and Tom Spalding was like, "You drew that?" And she's like, "Yeah." He's like, "You draw anything else?" And she's like, "Yeah." So she took up her portfolio, and he had her in
Mhm.
as an art apprentice at 16, which if anybody has ever brushed paths with Tom Spalding, he doesn't do that ever,
Wow.
ever. So it was like a huge honor. And so yeah, like that's one thing. If you're ever in New York, gotta let me know and I will hook
Mm.
you up with some ink that will stay.
I love it. Well, Christine, where can people find you? So if they want to learn more about therapy, if they're in the state of New York and want to talk to you about that. If they want to learn a little bit more about, what are personality disorders and what to look for and what not to believe on the internet. Or if they want to join you for a tattoo afternoon, where can they find you?
Christene Smart 2 at Instagram. And then my regular email is kind of like weird. It's ALWYDRML at AOL.com. And it stands for Always Dream Love. That's what ALWY, so that's what that stands for. And then I think honestly, if you Google me, I know I'm around on the internet, and the phone number that's on there will come to me. So that's another thing. And I work for a place, if you're in New York, called Freedom First Psychological Services, and that would be a way to get in touch with me. And while I'm licensed in New York, I really encourage anybody from anywhere can get in touch with me, because I am always happy to help anyone. Knowledge is power, and I am very person centered, and anybody that wants to know anything about this stuff, and absolutely always, I don't care where you're from, if you are in trouble, if you need help, and if you're like, wow, I heard this bitch talk on the Strong Enough podcast, and I think I could talk to her, like, seriously, reach out to me, and I will never tell someone who's in trouble no. Never. Never. I mean, I even see people for free. I get in trouble for it all the time, because I'm like, oh, you don't have money. Well, I'll see you pro bono and my boss is like, you're not making any money that way, right? I'm like, I'm trying to get into heaven. Like, I don't know what you're like, I'm good. And it's like, if it's the difference between helping somebody for nothing, like,
Mhm.
if that's going to break me, then I need to start prostitution. Though I'll never be a cheap slut. I would only be an expensive tramp. But
I love it. Christene, you have been amazing. I'm excited to have you back. You have just brightened my day so much.
yeah.
Next time we'll talk about cheap sluts versus expensive tramps.
Hell
I'm sure people are going to want to know about that.
yeah.
But in all seriousness, you have been fantastic. I really appreciate you, and thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks for having me. This was wonderful. I look forward to coming back.
If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and follow us on social media so you'll never miss what's going on. Remember, until next week, you are strong enough, you are worth it. Thank you for listening to the Strong Enough podcast. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform by searching Strong Enough. And on YouTube, we're on the Spear Talk channel. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Strong Enough Pod. If you have suggestions for an upcoming episode or a future guest, please reach out at strongenoughpod@gmail.com. Remember, you are worth it.